A skeptical insurance investigator is sent to track down a famous horror writer who has disappeared just before the release of his latest and possibly greatest book. What starts as a routine case quickly spirals into a mind-bending journey that blurs the lines between fiction and reality. Our protagonist embarks on an odyssey through madness, existential dread, and cosmic terror. Buckle up and join me as we question everything while the master of horror delivers what many consider his swan song before slipping into a career slump. So, what happens when you mix all my favorite things into one cinematic dish? Well, you start with a generous portion of my favorite director, throw in a dash of one of my favorite actors, and just for that extra bite add the lead from my all-time favorite war movie. And of course, no horror stew is complete without a massive helping of my favorite horror author. Jam him up there real tight. Season it all with cinnamon for that cozy Carpenter taste. Smooth. Let it simmer for 3 months and what you get is something that melts in your mouth of madness. The script for the movie was written by Michael De Luca already in the late 80s. De Luca had been working in New York in the Port Authority transit terminal in a bad neighborhood and felt afraid of all the homeless people who huddled around the facility. He started to wonder one night whether they could be part of an otherworldly conspiracy to replace the human race. An idea that might have occurred to Lovecraft himself, given his distaste and fears for many things lurking outside his sheltered life. De Luca then imagined an author so popular his fans constitute a religion, a combination of Stephen King and L. Ron Hubbard. De Luca pitched the script to John Carpenter in 1990, who thought it was wildly inventive but with other projects in the pipeline decided to take a pass. The script then made its way around town with directors like Mary Lambert and Tony Randall were considered. However, after the lukewarm reception of Carpenter's Memoirs of an Invisible Man in 1992, he circled back to the script. He had always wanted to tackle the works of H.P. Lovecraft, but knew the challenges of visualizing the undescribable. Seeing In the Mouth of Madness as his chance, Carpenter jumped on board in December 1992, and New Line Cinema backed the project with an $8 million budget. Carpenter hired Sam Neill to play the protagonist John Trent, a cynical and extremely skeptical insurance fraud investigator from New York. De Luca, who was not only the writer but also a studio executive, would have wanted someone akin to a classic New Yorker, but Neill had just come from a blockbuster that was Jurassic Park, and suddenly the New Zealander would do just fine. Other big names like James Woods, Ray Liotta and Michael Keaton were on Carpenter's shortlist, but Neill had already proven to be Carpenter's kind of actor, working with him in the Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Neill saw the humor in the role and gave Trent a touch of comedic flair while still delivering a gripping performance. Playing opposite Neill was Jürgen Prochnow as Sutter Kane, the reclusive horror writer whose books are literally driving readers insane. Prochnow had already made waves in the legendary Das Boot, and his performance brought a quiet, unnerving confidence to the character. Carpenter considered others like Rutger Hauer, but ultimately Prochnow's cool, confident, almost sexy demeanor made him the perfect fit for a man toying with the fabric of reality itself. Julie Carmen plays Linda Stiles, an editor working with Kane's publishing house sent to accompany Trent on his investigation. She already had experience in horror after appearing in Fright Night Part 2. To prepare for the role, she read At the Mountains of Madness, and Carpenter played Rosalind Russell films for her to show what he wanted out of the character. She later praised Carpenter for his great persona, advice, and extreme elegance with the camera. Like many Carpenter films, the minor roles were filled with very entertaining actors. David Warner was cast as Dr. Wren, a government agent who originally had a larger part in the Lucas script. John Glover played Saperstein, a doctor whose name was Yarbrough in the original script before Carpenter changed it, possibly as a nod to Rosemary's Baby. For the publishing magnate Jackson Harglow, Carpenter considered James Coburn but chose Charlton Heston. Oh, the agony of choice. Small roles included Francis Bay, Wilhelm von Homburg in his last feature, and the Carpenter regular Peter Jason. Regulars could be found in The Crusade as well, with Carrie P. Gibby returning as the head of cinematography in their third collaboration. Sandy King served as the producer for the first time. Carpenter's wife since 1990, she would also produce the next 3 movies her husband directed. The American composer Jim Lang was hired to do the score. He had already done Body Bags with Carpenter a year earlier, and the great director liked his rigorous, planned approach to music. As a composer, Carpenter himself was always an improviser, and he described having his exact opposite as a collaborator led to a very interesting conclusion. Carpenter wanted to use Metallica's Enter Sandman, but could not secure the rights, so the duo composed their own interpretation to be used in the intro.
He did not shriek, but the hideous, unholy abominations shrieked for him.
The filming took place in the fall of 1993 on locations in Ontario, Canada. Carpenter found Toronto to be convincing enough to act as New York, while Ontario itself had that isolated vibe to bring Lovecraft's New England ambience to the big screen. The town of Unionville served as Hobbs End, and the asylum scenes were filmed in a water reclamation plant near Lake Ontario, with the disturbed ward filmed on a soundstage. The intro sequence was filmed in a printing factory in Toronto. People often think this is a matte painting, yet it is not. The otherworldly church was the brand new Cathedral of Transfiguration in Markham, just north of Toronto. Building had finished just a few years earlier, and it was supposed to serve the Slovakian Catholic community in Ontario, which explains the Eastern-style architecture. A small donation later, the crew got the permission to use the church in the film. The visual effects for the film were done by Industrial Light and Magic, and the ambitious practical effects realized by K&B FX. These stunning depictions of Lovecraftian horrors were a hugely challenging task, and Carpenter constantly struggled with visualizing that which Lovecraft called beyond human comprehension. Working closely with K&B, they created some of the greatest realizations of Lovecraft's abominations ever put to screen, including this massive ensemble of horrors that took more than a month to build and was operated by 24 people for those few seconds of cinematic art. Carpenter only showed quick snippets of the monsters, which kept the audience guessing and not realizing it was basically just a giant puppet show. The corridor was less than 130 feet in length, that's less than 40 meters, but thanks to forced perspective, looks to go on forever. It would be an understatement to say the movie simply pays homage to the works of H.P. Lovecraft. The movie is more like a love letter from the master of horror to the father of cosmic horror. Everything from the movie's name to the themes it explores and countless small references to Lovecraft's works are readily on display. Even the story is told as a flashback, a technique so often used by the famous writer. While all the movies in his Apocalypse trilogy paid some kind of a tribute to Lovecraft, here the homage is used in such a blunt way you could use it as a sledgehammer. I know many of you are more than knowledgeable of seeing the connections yourself, so take the tidbits in rapid-fire fashion. The names of the books by Sutter Kane, whose name is a reference to Stephen King obviously, can be directly connected to Lovecraft's stories. The Whisperer in the Dark, The Whisperer in Darkness, The Hobbs End Horror, The Dunwich Horror, The Thing in the Basement, The Thing on the Doorstep, Haunter Out of Time, a combination of Haunter of the Dark and Shadow Out of Time, The Feeding, The Festival. The Breathing Tunnel is the only one I could not directly connect. If you can, please share it down below. Mrs. Pickman and the painting that keeps transforming were references to Pickman's model. The Black Church was a reference to the one described in Haunter of the Dark. Just like in Prince of Darkness, he also paid tribute to Nigel Kneale with Hobbs End. These contact lenses provided by K&B were not unproblematic, and the actor got some damage in his cornea. The three-legged dog actually ran away during shooting and the crew could not keep up. I wonder how fast it would have been with all four. They ended up getting a new three-legged dog. This scene was done all in one take. After Styles closes the door, the crew frantically reassembles the set to give Kane's inner sanctum its new look. They also had to do this more than a dozen times because the dog simply wouldn't cooperate. Bad dog. The key Styles swallows were made of pasta. Kneale got injured doing this scene as a piece of glass went into his neck. He got his revenge in this scene where Carpenter got a piece of glass in his eye. To this day, Kneale swears it was an accident. The film premiered on August 10th in 1994 in Germany of all places, and was released in the US 6 months later. The reviews, as always with great Carpenter movies, were mixed. While the direction, acting and special effects were praised, it was seen as being too complicated, self-indulgent and ultimately underwhelming. Roger Ebert gave the movie 2 stars out of 4, noting the script had no wit and lacked ambition. Oh Roger, I agreed with you twice in a row and you couldn't make it 3. The film was unfortunately another financial failure for Carpenter, barely making back its production budget, grossing only around $9 million. Our story begins with our protagonist, John Trent, forcibly thrown into a cell within a mental hospital. Outside, something cataclysmic looms, and a mysterious agent from an unnamed organization arrives to question him. It is here that Trent begins recounting his strange, spiraling descent into madness. He was an insurance investigator and was hired by a publishing house to track down the world's most famous horror author, Sutter Kane, who had mysteriously vanished just before the release of his highly anticipated new novel. Kane's works have had a strange, unsettling effect on his readers, with one even driving Kane's literary agent to madness. Trent, ever the skeptic, discovers a map cleverly hidden within the cover art of Kane's novels. While he suspects this is nothing more than an elaborate publicity stunt, he agrees to investigate, teaming up with Kane's publicist Linda Stiles to uncover the truth. Their journey takes them to New Hampshire, guided by the cryptic map. But as they draw closer to their destination, eerie and unsettling occurrences begin to unfold, signaling that something far more sinister is at play. Eventually, the lines between reality and fiction blur, and the duo find themselves in the seemingly deserted town of Hobbs End, a place that doesn't exist on any conventional maps, yet bears an uncanny resemblance to the eerie locales described in Kane's books. At the local hotel, the unsettling similarities between the fictional world of Kane's writing and the physical town grow more ominous. Their investigation leads them to a local church, where they finally come face to face with the elusive Sutter Kane. Here, they witness his chilling influence over the town's children and the rampant fear among the local residents. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, Trent stubbornly clings to his belief that everything around him is part of an elaborate hoax. Linda, however, succumbs to the strange pull of Kane's world, entering the church alone. Inside, Kane reveals that his writings are no longer just fiction. They have become real, powered by ancient malevolent beings known as the Old Ones, who are preparing to break into our world through his novels. When Linda returns, having succumbed to Kane's twisted narrative, Trent's grip on reality begins to unravel. The town itself starts to shift in nightmarish ways, with the hotel hostess and even Linda transforming into grotesque, monstrous figures. Desperate to escape, Trent attempts to flee, only to find himself trapped in an endless loop, driving in circles and always ending up back in Hobbs End. In a moment of revelation, Kane confronts him in a confessional, unveiling the full scope of his horrifying plan. Trent, it turns out, is not a real person but a character in Kane's story, a puppet designed to deliver the final manuscript that will unleash the apocalypse and the reign of the Old Ones. As Kane disappears to join his dark patrons, Trent makes a desperate run for it, pursued by the abominable creature straight out of Kane's hellish imagination. Though Trent manages to return to the outside world, the lines between fiction and reality have taken a beating. Haunted by Kane's omnipresence, Trent begins to lose his mind. His last refuge is the mental hospital, but even there, the terror persists. Released from his cell, Trent wanders through a desolate, empty world, eventually finding a movie theater playing In the Mouth of Madness, a film starring none other than himself, acting out the very events of his life. As he watches his own story unfold on the screen, the full weight of his insanity crashes down on him, and with that, the credits roll, leaving the audience to wonder whether reality ever existed at all. In the Mouth of Madness was the only Carpenter classic I did not see as a teenager. When my affection towards horror was rekindled while I was in the university a decade ago, I kept gorging horror movies by night and studied by day. In one of my late-night marathons, I stumbled upon this film, and it left a mark that still exists today. All three films of the Apocalypse trilogy are eternally some of my favorite movies of all time, and while many would consider The Thing to be the first among equals, for me, In the Mouth of Madness takes the top rank, and I place it number 2 on the list of my favorite Carpenter flicks, just behind Christine. At its core, In the Mouth of Madness isn't just a horror film. It's a reflection on the power of storytelling and the fragility of our perception of reality. John Carpenter plays with the idea that stories, especially those we deeply believe in, have the power to shape our world, as so many religious, political, or mythological have done in the past. Fiction becomes reality if enough people believe in it. It's a scary thought, and it's not that difficult to find comparisons to many events that have taken place in our world. The film speaks to a deeper fear than just monsters or madness, the fear that reality itself is unreliable, that we are mere puppets in somebody else's narrative, and that the truths we cling to can dissolve at any moment. It taps into the same vein of existential dread that runs through the works of Lovecraft, the idea that we are utterly insignificant in the face of forces we cannot even understand, let alone control, and which would effortlessly sweep us aside like insects without a second thought.
Reality is not what it used to be. Jesus.
Now, it doesn't take that much skill to pack a film with endless references to beloved things, and many movies end up as shallow compilations of fan service, offering little to those unfamiliar with the source material. Carpenter, however, transcends this common pitfall. In the Mouth of Madness doesn't just throw out nods to Lovecraft's mythos, it immerses itself in his legacy while crafting a film that remains gripping and entertaining, even for those who haven't even heard of the famous writer. I'm genuinely perplexed by critics who found the film confusing or overly complicated. It seems that in their pursuit of cheap thrills, they were put off by the idea of engaging with a horror movie that dares to challenge and provoke thought. A film that pushes its audience to reflect rather than merely react can be a burden for some, but it's precisely what makes this movie stand apart. Also, unlike other films in Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, In the Mouth of Madness has a darkly comedic streak that perfectly balances the insanity unfolding on screen.
Fuck you!
It's not that scary though, just damn good entertainment. The movie also boasts my favorite cast in any Carpenter film. Sam Neill, one of my all-time favorite actors, delivers a brilliant performance as John Trent. Neill's trademark style is tailor-made for Trent, a cynical, self-assured insurance investigator who approaches everything with a blend of suspicion and condescension. I've previously criticized Prince of Darkness on how quickly its characters embrace the supernatural explanations, but here Trent's dogged resistance to the truth grounds the film.
You see, you can't bullshit a bullshitter, can you? Because I'll tell you how, this whole thing has been staged, that's how. You, Harglow, and Kane, you put me through all of this so I can go back and blab to the media about Kane's haunted little town.
Jürgen Prochnow is equally impressive as Sutter Kane. His calm yet unnerving confidence towards Trent gives Kane an omnipotent aura. Always 10 steps ahead and enjoys every minute of it, and Prochnow's interpretation of the character is just spot on.
Always looking for the con. Even now you're trying to rationalize.
However, I have more mixed feelings about Julie Carmen's portrayal of Linda Stiles. As one of the key supporting characters, her performance felt somehow flat and disjointed, lacking the intensity I expected. But considering she is merely a pawn in Kane's grand narrative, some might argue that her stilted portrayal fits within the broader context of the film's themes. Even so, it left me conflicted. On the other hand, the minor roles are filled with standout performances. Frances Bay is brilliantly unsettling as Mrs. Pigman, while David Warner's Dr. Wren, John Glover's Dr. Saperstein, and Charlton Heston's Jackson Harglow are all memorable in their own right. It's also a joy to see familiar faces like Peter Jason and Wilhelm von Homburg in small roles. The special effects were very impressive. Anything from Mrs. Pigman's transformation to the body contortionist and the epic horde of monstrosities were some of the best practical effects ever put to film, especially considering the film's modest budget. It is a daunting task for any director to try to make Lovecraft's depiction of things beyond human comprehension into visual form, and I cannot think it could be done any better than this. Originally, there was supposed to be a scene where the entire town of Hobbs End would be swallowed up by the Sutter Kane's writings, which would have been a great finale to the Apocalypse trilogy. The score is unsurprisingly another high point. Carpenter's collaboration with Jim Lang strikes the perfect balance between an eerie atmosphere and an energetic rock-inspired soundtrack. It's so captivating that I find myself rewatching the intro every time, just to hear that pulse-pounding opening riff. One more time, take it away, Jim. Now, was this Carpenter's final great film? I can see why some might say so, given the string of disappointments that followed. But for me, his 1998 film Vampires still carried that unmistakable Carpenter magic. While not as good as many of his earlier works, I still think Vampires was his last bow. In the end, In the Mouth of Madness succeeds where so many films stumble. While Prince of Darkness was way better in terms of mood setting, this one shines by working all the way through to the final moments. Its stellar cast, impressive visual effects, and a narrative that demands both thought and engagement make it a standout. Whether or not In the Mouth of Madness was Carpenter's final triumphant swan song, every time I see that trademark cynical grin on Sam Neill's face, I'm reminded how much I love this movie. A movie that continues to stand the test of time and makes me stand in awe. So, what did you think of the movie? Do you ever cut the covers of your books to pieces to make a map in the hope of winning a novelty lunchbox? Whatever the case may be, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and why not spread the madness around by sharing the link? I will be back sometime with something else.